Hey everyone, thanks for waiting. It's gonna be worth it. I'm Heather Moran, I'm the CEO here at 6th and I, and whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, on behalf of 6th and I and our partner Politics and Prose, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and for continuing to support nonprofits and independent bookstores. Now, how many of you are here for the first time? Raise your hand. Oh, welcome. It's so nice to meet you. Well, I'm going to share a little bit about this very special place, if you'll allow me, as if you have a choice. After opening in 1908, this building was a synagogue for 45 years, and then it was an African Methodist Episcopal church for the next 50. I know, right? When the church relocated and put the building up for sale in the early 2000s, the highest bid was from someone who wanted to turn this place into a what? A nightclub, which would have been banging for sure, but within 24 hours, 3 local real estate developers saved the building, paving the way for 6th and I to become a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. Thanks. And for the past 18 years, our mission has been to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives through an unexpected mix of experiences that embrace the multifaceted identities of those we serve. On January 6th, 2021, our country came dangerously close to losing its democracy. Just 6 blocks from where you're sitting tonight, a mob violently attacked the Capitol building in an attempt to disrupt the certification of the presidential election and prevent the peaceful transfer of power. An act of domestic terror without parallel in American history. It endures as one of those historic moments where you'll always remember where you were when you heard the news. I will remember coming into this building 2 days later, having to show my ID at an armed checkpoint with a tank around the corner at 600 and Massachusetts Avenue. We came to remove our Torah scrolls from the building to make sure they stayed safe. In a resolution 6 months later, the House of Representatives established a special committee to investigate how and why the attack happened. And as you know, the findings of their investigation were released last month. Tonight, we are so proud to welcome Emmy Award-winning journalist Ari Melber to 6th and I. He is here to present his analysis of Congress's January 6th report and the wider conspiracy to overthrow the 2020 election. The printed edition of the report, with a foreword written by Ari, quickly became the #1 nonfiction book in the country, besting editions of the report from the New York Times and New Yorker. Before becoming MSNBC's chief legal correspondent and the anchor of The Beat with Ari Melber, Ari practiced First Amendment law and served as a legislative aide in the US Senate. His deep understanding of the law and the inner workings of Congress distinguishes his reporting and broadens our understanding of the critical issues of the day. But, as the rapper Drake says, you can't listen to me talk and go tell my story. So, I'm going to leave that to attorney John P. Flannery, who we are thrilled to have with us tonight. Mr. Flannery is a former federal prosecutor and regular guest commentator on TV and radio. He served as the special counsel to the US Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Labor Committee. Later in the program, we'd love to hear your questions, and you'll be invited to line up at the standing mics in either aisle. And then following the event, signed books will be for sale in the main lobby, buy lots of them. And we'll also have a meet and greet on stage. So please hang on to the tickets you got when you entered if you'd like to participate. Thank you all for being here and at home, for being with us. Ari Melber is gonna kick things off tonight, so please join me in giving him a warm welcome to 6th and I.
Open it. I open it by saying, they attempted a coup. That's the most important fact about what happened. And for some people that sounds obvious, and for some it might sound like, doesn't that happen other places, not here? And that, I think, is the most important thing that the nation digests and that the Justice Department has to deal with, because while arresting and prosecuting and now convicting people like Mr. Barnett matters and obviously must happen, if you only go after those people, then you are treating it more as a one-day crime scene, a riot, as some called it, violence, which we saw deployed against the police, all serious felonies, but none of those things on their own, when private citizens do them in a disjointed manner, comprise an attempted coup. And when I say it's an attempted coup, I'm not talking about adjectives, criticism, opinion. I'm not talking about whether you dislike Donald Trump, which many people do for many reasons. I'm talking about who Donald Trump was before this, which is one set of conversations, and then what it means when someone in government, in power, tries to steal your democracy and your vote. And what does it mean if they're allowed near power again? So that, I think, undergirds all of this. What I want to then do is say, okay, if we're in this room and you're here and you're listening to me and you're saying, that sounds logical, that sounds straightforward, don't factual people agree on this? Or isn't this obvious? Or at least people say who are maybe more inclined to hold Trump accountable, let's say Democrats, don't we all agree on this? I would remind you, no. I would remind you that even though the Democratic Congress rushed to hold the quickest ever impeachment in reaction to something which many people feel was merited, that impeachment and that Senate trial was largely at the time over a speech. And I bet, because I can tell you're here, I bet a lot of you followed it. In the foreword, I quote from one of the closing arguments of that trial, where one of the impeachment managers said, Trump took the stage on January 6th. He knew how combustible the situation was. The crowd ready to engage in violence. He aimed them at the Capitol. That's the closing argument. And it was presented then as basically, I'm simplifying as I sometimes do in my work, but convict Trump because he went on stage and he gave a speech and he exhorted people to storm the Capitol, and they did. And that, compared to what we've learned in these 2 years with the probe and other material, that's nothing. That is like almost an afterthought. If you had a Trump lawyer right now in federal court or in the Georgia case talking about the speech, that would be a defense argument. That would be minimizing it. So even as some things might seem obvious, if they weren't obvious to the Democratic managers who were leading that at the time, why is that? And that goes to, I think, why this report matters, why I chose to engage in my own way in the project, which is we have learned on the evidence, not because people have feelings about Donald Trump, on the evidence that this was a multi-month, highly organized, attempted coup. So if it's that, then you have to, in a nation of laws, go way beyond the Barnetts and the people who stormed the Capitol, who should also be held accountable. I guess because I'm a lawyer and a journalist and a little bit nerdy, I always go back to the documents. John's going to come up here. He does the same thing. So if you go look at the authorizing resolution of the January 6th committee, which has now completed its work, right? You're like, oh, God, we got to talk about the authorizing resolution? I thought tonight was going to be somewhat conversational. The committee's authorization to do its work was to, quote, investigate the January 6th attack, evaluate evidence about it, and build on other investigations, quote, while avoiding unnecessary duplication. Go investigate what went down that day. I would argue to you tonight, based on the evidence, that was also too narrow. But that's why you need a fair investigation. They had Republicans on it like Liz Cheney. They had a lot more Democrats because of the nature of our politics. But they followed the evidence, and they found this went way beyond their original brief because it was not just a one-day attack or a couple days prep for a one-day attack. So I think that is the most important conceptual frame. We could get into the details tonight, and I'm going to run through a couple of the plots right now in very short order and then bring John up. But if you remember one thing from tonight, or you bring home this tablet, this Talmud, if you will, and you don't end up reading it, that's what I want you to remember, because as a society, it matters. The conception we have in a democracy of what this was and how it's grown matters, and what comes next matters. You saw in the midterms, all these pundits and people who tell you what's going to happen next, they don't know. But what we do matters. So on the plots, I count 8 plots. Again, because I don't want to be overly redundant, by a show of hands, how many people know about, like, when we went through these 8 plots on the beat or in the forward? So less than half. So good, because for those of you, again, sorry. But I do want to use this platform to really make sure we make this point. I count 8 plots that were designed to change the outcome of the election. And I count 7 of them were unconstitutional or illegal by the end. And 1 was fully lawful, even if it was a brazen effort to overturn the election. So they are, in my count, and like any count, people could quibble. I count lawsuits, elector fraud, getting the states to overturn the votes, getting Congress to overturn the votes, getting Pence to overturn the votes, getting the DOJ to interfere to overturn the votes, having the military join a coup, and then the actual sabotaging of the January 6th certification, which happened, which we lived through. So out of those 8, very quickly, I'm going to run through some of this. Lawsuits, by definition, tend to be legal. Even frivolous lawsuits, which are sanctionable, are legal. And we don't want to live in a society where people are punished for bringing what might be considered wacky or out-of-bounds lawsuits, which is to say, it's not a crime to file a lawsuit, even one that tries to overturn an election. Done. Electors. It is okay to create plans to have alternative electors before it's finalized, and you can point to close elections, not this one, 2020 wasn't close, but you can point to close elections where, because they hoped a recount or a lawsuit would change the outcome, they had electors set up. By my legal analysis, the initial effort to have some Trump electors in states that Biden was winning was initially probably lawful. It became clearly illegal after the Electoral College, under the Constitution and law, certified the electors December 14th, and these people went running around for several more weeks committing elector fraud. DOJ hasn't charged anyone with elector fraud. Maybe a prosecutor as experienced as Mr. Flannery can explain why. I don't know why. And again, that's not an effort to go get Donald Trump. I mean, he may have enough deniability that he didn't actually sign anything or do anything on it. That might not be what even gets him. But people are in prison right now, many of them poor, black, and brown, for single voter fraud cases. That's a single person's alleged or convicted voter fraud. Elector fraud, what they were trying to do all the way up and through the morning of the 6th, is far more serious. The states overturned votes. The third plot is something that was pursued in a way that was not known or covered at the time, but it actually went to a really high level, and it was trying to convince states to just chuck their own voters' outcome. It didn't work very well because even very partisan Republicans saw that as career suicide. Now you can say, well, it's cynical. The founders had an eye on that kind of cynicism, and they wanted to lever it to, as we've always been told in school, separate powers. That one didn't work very well. Congress overturned votes, got very far. Many, many House Republicans continued to try to execute that plot after the attack on their own workplace and the right-wing savagery against the police who risked their lives to defend them. They came back in and did that. I think most of you are familiar. Pence is a plot that's gotten a lot of attention. I would call that unconstitutional, not illegal. And I point this out in the report, again, not whether we like it or not, but there are a lot of things that the government might try to do that's unconstitutional that aren't a crime. So everyone, I think, remembers the travel ban. It was very quickly ruled unconstitutional and stopped. I think if Pence tried to go forward with that bananas plan, he would have been stopped. But doing that would not, in and of itself, by my view, constitute a crime. It would just constitute something that would be stopped. DOJ interfering for votes was something that the committee, I think, exposed in a fascinating way. We learned about these really extreme plots, what would have been a full Saturday Night Massacre. Trump talked out of it not because it was illegal or wrong, but because they said the headline won't be about Georgia. The headline will be about you. And the guy knows headlines. Moving to the final two, we learned that he pushed to have the military join a coup. And he failed at that. And one of the interesting lessons here that does separate our system of government from some other countries is because of the nature of the independence of the military, the permanence of some of those posts, and other legal issues we can get into, it's a little harder to get those folks to go along. Indeed, they were actually holding meetings, figuring out what not to do. And sadly, I would say tragically, their concern about the potential effort by Trump to abuse military or National Guard against people in this town was one of the things that made them reticent to have the military show up on the 6th. So, you know, life is complicated. I think what was actually a fair motivation ended up complicating what needed to be an immediate response. And that's not the only reason. We can get into the others. And then finally, what we lived through, the plot to sabotage January 6th. So what I write in this forward and what I want to do now is move on with our evening is look at those 8 plots, look at the culpability, and then ask the question, why is the Justice Department primarily focused on the muscle and the physical storming of the Capitol and not those other plots? And again, at the risk of being annoyingly repetitive, but again, I'm at a synagogue, if I was giving I don't want to traffic in any stereotypes. I'll just say on behalf of myself, sometimes I repeat myself. I'm not saying it's how I was raised. At the risk of being repetitive, that's the largest question for the plotting and the planning, regardless of what happens to Donald Trump. A fair-minded prosecutor might look at all this and say, he's so experienced at thuggish and criminal planning that he really reduced the evidence and might be hard to indict, and you have to indict on evidence, not on feelings. But the idea that the people who committed the elector fraud and who met to overturn the election and who also plotted the sabotage of the 6th, which occurred, the certification was delayed, the government meeting was interfered with and hindered, to use the language of federal law, but Mr. Eastman and Mr. Meadows and these individuals have not, none of them, been held accountable for that to date, not in DC, not in the federal government, not in Georgia. That strikes me as a huge problem. And again, I always try to keep it really clear with you guys. It strikes me as a problem of deep-seated bias at the top of the Justice Department, specifically Attorney General Garland and the tone he's setting, and a bias that has to do with elitism, with making excuses for lawyers, with a revolving door of elite government officials. And bias means you can find it on your own side, you can find it on people you agree with. If you only think people that are really different than you are biased, you might be biased. So Mr. Eastman, for example, has sterling legal credentials. I mean, when I got out of law school, I could not have won a clerkship on the Supreme Court. There's a process for that. I wasn't at that level. He got this Supreme Court clerkship. That's the type of thing that judges and lawyers are impressed by. But it should not be a get-out-of-jail-free card or a passport to overthrowing our government. Something is wrong if there's that level. And so it's not my job to prejudge and pre-indict everyone, but when you can see that level of disparity, if you see it based on access, power, profession, race, when you see that at a data level, not an individual level, we have a problem. And that's part of the problem. And that's why I really wanted to lay this out in the forward. I'm glad that people are apparently reading it. I'm glad people are buying it. I always mention the entire report. I know people are listening in the virtual audience too. The entire report's downloadable for free. So you can get the whole report if that's a better way for you. You don't have to buy it. It's important that this lives as a historical document, and it's up to us. With that, what we're going to do tonight is hear something of a miniature opening statement from a very talented prosecutor who's done work in U.S. attorneys' offices, who's been counsel to 3 congressional probes who we rely on in our coverage. And then we're going to have a convo and take some of your questions. So please join me in welcoming Counselor John Flannery.
Very well done. Nice. Well, thank you. I was so enjoying Ari, I forgot I was supposed to get up and speak. He had me davening before we came in here. When one of the first times I appeared on his show, he was in New York, and after we shook hands, he faced the camera alone, and he said something nice about me. And then he said, and he's the Robert Redford of the Beltway. And then he said, I told him to say that. And I said off camera, no, I didn't. He said, well, no, he didn't say that. We have a problem with prosecutors. They talk about junkyard dogs and that kind of thing, and this is the problem we will get to in my review of what Ari was talking about, and I want to talk about Ari too. But I want to get to this point. When I was out of law school, I wanted to be a prosecutor after I clerked because I wanted to get the corruption in politics. And Whitney North Seymour, who was a Republican, was a U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. And he indicted his boss, John Mitchell. And they tried him while I was clerking. And I went down and I watched John Dean testify at the invitation of Judge Gagliardi. Now, after I heard him testify, I thought I'd never heard anybody more persuasive and more truthful than this man. And I got in the elevator with Mrs. Gagliardi, who was also there, and we went up in the judge's elevator, and she asked me what I thought, and I hadn't decided how to say it. And I said something interesting, and she said, I didn't believe a word he said either. So much for that. But when he spoke to his assistant U.S. attorneys, and they got flack for what he had done, he said, look, if you want people to love you, forget that. Get yourself a Cocker Spaniel. We don't have enough people that have that notion of service, and I was lucky because we were all law clerks, and so we already thought we told the judge what was supposed to happen, so we didn't know why they didn't listen to us now. Ari is a man who strikes me as a person who has character and dedication, especially to the truth and to his learning and to standards. And only by applying those things can we say we're on the right course, the right path. There's an exchange between Sir Thomas More and his brother-in-law about the law. And his brother-in-law is saying, because he might be killed, because he won't sign on to the new church that Henry VIII has created, his son-in-law is telling him, oh, tear down all the laws, get past them, tear down, go after the devil. And Sir Thomas More answers, sure, tear down all the laws, and you're just the person to do it. And when you've torn down all the laws, and there's nothing left, and these are man's laws, not God's law, could you stand in the wind that would blow? When Ari began his summary of what January 6th report was about and what was going on in America, he started with the point of, is this more important than another crime? And he said, well, it's democracy versus autocracy. Do we want an authoritarian leading our government? And if we have an authoritarian leading our government, then what are we going to have? Are we going to have a vote? And he suggested not. And then the question on top of that is, does our Constitution mean anything? And if it means nothing, can we stand in the wind that would blow? And I think not. And I think there's evidence of it. And there's evidence of the failure of prosecutors to do anything in the 2 years that have passed that by forcing people to account would put us in a better position. We might not have the speaker that we have who talks as he does and would limit the function of the people in the government. And this is not imagination. This is true. Look at the people who No Jacket Jordan is going to head the Judiciary Committee. What are we talking about? Now, let's take a couple of the words that are in Ari's summation. Trump on September the 23rd, there won't be a transfer. There will be a continuation. Does that sound an authoritarian? Steve Bannon said in the fall, before the election, that doesn't mean he's a winner. He's just going to say he's winning. Rudy Giuliani, drunk. I know, it's always that way. I sold him my apartment in Manhattan, by the way. I did. Rudy, oh, so now you think I'm a congressman from Long Island, huh? Rudy Giuliani. The best are those that you don't plan, I guess. Rudy Giuliani on the night of election, while he was, I guess, being led around by his son, maybe, who wasn't drunk, he got to the president to say 4 words. We just say we won. And that's what they did, and that's what he went out and did. Now, I've heard in recent days the experts commenting on how they prosecute it, and they do aiding and abetting, and they do this and that and the other thing. The fact that you have 8 paths to deal with, you have to have a standard to figure out how you use those 8 paths. And Ari has put that out in a summary. In fact, his summary is like a tenth of the whole report. And if you read, and I mean read it, spend time thinking about each sentence, and I'm serious about this, you will know everything you need to know, in my opinion, about where we stand in danger of losing democracy and what we can do to change that. Normally in a conspiracy, and I'll explain in a moment why conspiracy is important, and I'll do it within 5 minutes. And the importance of a conspiracy is that everybody in the conspiracy, when they say something to further the conspiracy, this fellow said it over here, and Trump's in that conspiracy, and it affects him. But normally, one of the reasons you have a conspiracy about the worst person, in this case Trump, it's because you can't get to him. He's shielded and protected, as Ari says in his brief. But here's something very strange. Trump is out there in the open. There was a case in which Tremonti, interesting, close, Tremonti from the Genovese family, nice family once you get to know them, and he said Tremonti only shrugged his shoulders at one meeting, and that was enough for him to participate in the conspiracy. But we have a guy once in the White House who has meetings with everybody, and to be brief about this, which I'm working on, is I consider that there are the following pressure points, which I drew up today. I pretended that Garland was no longer inert, and he decided to appoint somebody who would actually prosecute a case with the evidence that they had. Instead of teasing America that someday, somehow, Blackjack Smith is going to finally do what everybody knows should be done. First pressure point, electors. They're creating false documents to create a fraud on the government. And who's involved? Trump himself is involved, Eastman's involved, Giuliani's involved. Trump spoke to some 300 Republican state legislatures. Evidence. Another pressure point, December 18th, 2020, after the election, before January, Sidney Powell is being considered to deal with how do you overturn the election? Do we invoke martial law? Do we seize voting machines? Mark Meadows is present. Pat Cipollone is present. Chief of Staff and Counsel. That's a pressure point. Trump's there, and you have witnesses you can use. Another pressure point. Trump is pressing the Secretary of State on January the 2nd to, do me a favor. Find those extra votes I need. And who's involved in that? Meadows, Navarro, Eastman, Rudy G. Rogue Rudy. His defense should be, you should arrest me for impersonating a lawyer. So, and then the final one that I really like, and I think I would build a conspiracy around these 4. And if somebody says something's not a crime, as you have rightly said, you can use overt acts that involve innocent acts that advance the conspiracy. That's why prosecutors love conspiracy law, because all you have to do is, once you're in it for everything, even things that you don't know until it's too late. And here we had Jeffrey Clark, who wanted to jump on what was going on with Raffensperger in Georgia, and do that by replacing himself as Jeffrey Clark was going to become the acting attorney general and force Georgia to do what everybody wanted to do, and only a threatened Saturday night event was going to stop that. Finally, and the last thing I'll say, and I have no idea how close it is to 5 minutes, so I apologize if I've went over. I'm a penitent, the Irish get a lot of chance, So this is the most important thing in America. If we, the people, do not play our part and inform the courage and backbone of some of our worthless leaders, we may not have another election after 2024. And that's all that's at stake, our Constitution, our individual freedoms and rights. I want to thank you for your patience. Thank you. I don't. You go.
Can you hear me okay? You see why we use John Flannery. He's great. I'm told by our colleagues at 6 and I you went 11 minutes. Yeah, that's what I'm told.
Okay, I won't talk for 5.
I really appreciate what you said, John. I really want to engage with everyone. So I think what John and I are going to do now is just talk with 2 or 3 points.
Sure.
And then we get to the questions. Where I want to start with you is something that has gotten less attention, which is the actual end game. And you guys can tell now that I like to do the hands thing. So when television evolves with this technology or the metaverse and we can all participate, the beat's going to get more annoying. It'll be like a camp counselor every night. But I don't get to do this on air. But I show you how many people, or you think you know what the actual end game was on the 6th. If they actually stormed the Capitol but then finished the job. I'm curious. The question is, we know they stormed the Capitol, right? What was the actual end game? Do you know what was going to happen if this continued to work? What was so someone said martial law, so hands. What? Overturn the election, but how? Cool, all right, this is good, I like this. Delay. So I'm hearing different things, and the report has this, and I think it's very complicated, so I understand why they didn't lead with it. But I don't know about you, John, I thought it was almost buried in the report.
Right.
I'm going to give my version of the answer, and then I want you to tell us what you think.
Okay.
And it was hatched by Eastman, Peter Navarro, and Steve Bannon. Beyond storming the Capitol or the delay, which was a step, the end game was to create enough chaos, confusion, or the pretext of this now being contested to argue that it was no longer a validly resolved election, and to go to a fairly arcane but existing legal provision that says if there's a truly contested election, this, as you know, was not, then there can be a separate vote in the House of Representatives that resolves an actually contested election. Show of hands, is this familiar? I'm curious. I'm really curious. All right, so this is, a lot of people know about this. And then that is not, you might say, well, then what's the vote on that? That vote is not resolved by majority vote in the House. Mm-hmm. Under the rules, it's done by delegations. Now, there may be Republicans who said they're not going along with that, right? Liz Cheney would have been the vote for Wyoming. But their plan and what they reasoned was by that count, there would have been 27 Republican delegations, and it's one vote per state delegation. And if you're thinking this sounds bananas, it is bananas. Mm-hmm. So is really the Electoral College. I work on this, as you know, a lot of people here tonight, I care about this. I kind of understand why this has not gotten a ton of attention, but I also think people sometimes in the country underestimate how serious this was because they do look at it as well. Even if it was delayed a day or two, then it would have been resolved. What do you think about all that? What do you say to Republicans who would argue, well, if they got that far and you held that House vote, well, that's in the rules. What about all that as a risk for the future, given that we've now seen how far they'll go?
Well, nothing improves your aim like having a target, Aristotle. Their aim, and he had nothing to do with storming the castle. Their objective was to seize power in any way possible. And their theory was an incorrect legal theory admitted as not being lawful. And the facts upon which it was based was lying electors. Now, if those things were true, then 27 people in the House might have resolved it that way. But they hoped to do a shell game on us. And the shell game would have resulted in Trump becoming president, and it might have been the last election in the United States.
So you view that as an outcome that, with a few different ingredients, was possible.
It was possible. We came that close to losing our democracy, but we think we're okay now. You know, that ball missed my head, but they're still there.
And do you think, and this is into legal theory that we don't often always do on the national news because we're in the weeds,
Right.
If they did hold that kind of vote and say they got 26, but on this set of facts, then there's, say, 11, 12 days until the 20th. Do you think the Supreme Court would then take that case, intervene, and overrule the House, or just stay out of it?
Do you remember who was appointed to the Supreme Court?
So you think they would just leave it?
Hey, look, if you can overturn 50 years because you're a political hack and got there and that was your contract, and we have the people who do that, you know.
What do you say, John, to people who look at this and they see big picture, a bad trend line, and they say, they'll try, but it looks like things are going downhill for democracy in America, and maybe they'll just focus on protecting their own family or investing abroad, or some people talk about other things. What do you say to people who are pessimistic about the rule of law in America?
Well, I tell them that, I really tell them what the quote from Moore, which is that when you take away the rules, you get violence, you get chaos, you get anarchy. And if you choose to use the chapter of how we chose a speaker among people you think agreed that they just won the House, and they can't agree on it, and we can see going forward, we're going to see paralysis and a failure to govern and to have an eternal campaign. And they're just going to push for that end zone. So what I tell them is the rights and freedoms that you take for granted will be lost by people that don't believe in them, that don't want a court deciding that you, a black person, have this value, or you, a woman, have control over your body, or that we can teach you these things about our history so you understand how maybe to repair it and perfect American government.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because we're here, and then we're going to go into questions, because that's why some of you are probably here, is I don't do a lot with God and religion on the air for a variety of reasons, and it's above my pay grade. But as mentioned, we are here at this synagogue, and I did grow up going to synagogue. And I might bludgeon it a little bit, but I'm pretty sure, you know, on the bima it says something to the effect of Ra lifnei mi ata omer.
Right.
Know before whom you stand. And the baseline concept of many religions, many Western religions, not all, I suppose, is that people might be better or treat each other better if they have some higher calling, some idea that there's an ethical or other dimension, and people interpret it different ways, and again, I'm not here to resolve it. And Western law, when it works, has a similar idea. Not that we're all automatically going to be good all the time, but if there are some baseline principles that are enforced, we might end up treating each other better and have a better world. Does it matter then, and how do you view what I described as this double standard, that some people are learning before whom they stand because they are being investigated and prosecuted, and so many others seem to be getting away. This double standard in a modern American rule of law. How do you view that? Is it dangerous if this Justice Department continues in the way I described? And is it changeable without devolving into, they used to be called witch hunts because they were hunting actual witches that weren't witches, not Donald Trump. It's not a Trump hunt. So he kind of ruined the word. But it is true, if you go all the way back to Salem, that we don't want actual hunts for witches that don't exist. We don't want a mob justice. It's not my job to make those cases. How do you look at that, and how do you fix it without devolving into mob justice as well, which is the other extreme?
You have to appreciate that there are people who are evil who have no values. There's a statement attributed to Jesus, which is that
Who was Jewish.
and for 100
Yeah, and not like Santos Jewish. Like totally Jewish.
but that's Jewish. Jewish.
Who knew there'd be so many Jewish jokes tonight?
Well, a little equal time. In Luke, Jesus is reported to say that he cursed lawyers, how appropriate, for imposing a burden on people without lifting a finger to lighten the load.
Say it again.
You impose a burden on people without lifting a finger to lighten the load. So if I cut out Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and food for children and so on, what kind of a person am I? Who can even conceive of that? Who doesn't have a relation with children and so forth? Now, I think Trump is the poster child for evil in this sense. In this sense, he only cares psychologically about getting whatever it is he wants any way he can. How many people who had the values we have and say things on the evening news like, how could he say that? It must have been a mistake. Everybody's, for a long time, is prepared to credit that this is somehow an honorable man in here hidden. It's just waiting to come out. And he's not even approximately that. And who chooses as an example? I could go out and shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and I could do that. So I don't know. He's Billy the Kid in New York, but so that's our problem. The problem is we cannot functionally believe that that person is evil enough to do what they're doing, and to call it that and call it out. How do people make these inconsistent statements between the attack on the Capitol, say McCarthy, and then the next day, oh, it's okay? Did there some moment in his soul seize him, and then he had to express this? So you may have studied the Talmud. I was exposed to the Jesuits, and they teach you how to use your mind, then they're terrified when you do. So
Incredible. Well, as promised, I like to keep it moving. I appreciate what you're raising for us to think about. I would invite people to come to the microphones. We're going to take your questions, at least 2 or more at a time. So queue on up. I'm going to start with one of the virtual questions while people queue up. I will tell you, because I've done this before, what I would ask is, you can introduce yourself if you want. I'd ask you to have questions that are 30 seconds or less. If you prefer to use your 30 seconds to make a comment, that's fine. Doesn't have to be a question, but I think it has to be concise so that we have time for everyone. I really appreciate how many people are here and engaged and attentive. It's wonderful to be together. Here we are. And to begin it, I know there are also a lot of people who we can't see tonight, people who, for whatever reason, wanted to join us virtually and did, and some of them sent in questions. So Six and I asked me to make sure to include those. I'm going to do one of those up top. Great question from Sarah in Rockville, Maryland. I like the question for you, John, and I'll answer it as well briefly. What was the most shocking thing you learned from the report? I'll let you think for a sec since I just read it. My answer's quick. There were people in the report who were not nailed for crime who we'd never heard about signing on to the coup plans, and that surprised me. I don't know why they didn't include that in the hearings, whether it's evidentiary, it came later, or they wanted to stay focused. But, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich was joined in on White House planning sessions about some of these plots I mentioned. The committee does not say that he crossed the line into crime, but that he was helping. Someone who runs a very influential media company is accused of this. He has come out and denied it, which I want to mention in fairness, but the Newsmax CEO, Chris Ruddy, identified with evidence and accused of that. And what if Mr. Gingrich happened to have been Speaker at the time? We know that Mitch McConnell, whatever you think of him, did do some certain very minor, I think, low bar, but steps against this around the 6th and recently in December. What if Mr. Gingrich just happened to still be in office? What if Chris Ruddy had the influence that Murdoch has? Murdoch also someone who's signed on to many things we've held him accountable for on air, but he was not on the 6th and the 7th trying to bring it home. And I found that, to answer Sarah's question, chilling to think about these other powerful people behind the scenes who, without this investigation, we wouldn't have ever known they were even involved. That's my answer. Yours, and then we go out here.
Well, I'd adopt everything you said, but the thing that struck me was that Pence was being manipulated to leave the Hill under the cover of the Secret Service, and then we've since learned additional things about the Secret Service, including the spoliation of some information that would tell people exactly what they were doing and when and where. So this infiltration of the secure forces of the country were almost like we've seen in history, some dictators who went in, co-opt, make believers, true believers, out of people to betray their oaths, which is rampant across the Hill. And then, of course, the number of members who were involved, continuing to fight to have this phony certification of alternate electors in order to still steal, even after they were put at risk. Ask Hawley running around.
Great. Those are two of our answers. We'll start down here.
My name is Timothy Decker, and I have a question about Donald Trump and the media. What I've noticed is when Donald Trump first came down the escalator and he talked about the Mexicans and being rapists and everything after that, what we've seen from the media, and including you too, Mari, is it's the base. In the beginning, everybody keeps saying it's the base. Even now, they say it's the base. But when they did it, Mitch McConnell didn't say anything. When he did it, the second in charge of the Senate or the House didn't say anything. It's not the base. But every time I look at, even today, it's the base. How do you think that's affecting what people are thinking, especially people that need to stop what's going on right now? So we're saying it's only 30%, but it's not. It's the entire Republican Party.
Thank you. And we'll also take here, that was Timothy, right? Yeah. Timothy? Thank you, Timothy. Yeah.
Hi. John, first of all, hand over heart for your pin and Holly, and I'm so glad that y'all are doing good with that, just from my heart. You mentioned something about the electors, and I don't have much information, but you have electors that I'm assuming is a whole thing that has to do with the Electoral College and nothing else. And then you have alternative electors that can be nominated. So where, and that thing in the Supreme Court that could come down saying, you know, that's the reigning body of the elections, which is scary. But what is the policing authority between assigning alternative electors and phony electors? Like, what is that distinction? Because that seems really important given that Supreme Court case.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't you answer that, and I'll take the media question. You go first.
Okay, I could do that. I was hoping for an easier question. Well, here's the thing that's truly annoying. The FBI has reportedly been investigating this for I don't know how long about these false electors, and nobody's been indicted. And the answer is you indict them. It's very interesting how the Southern District could prosecute that complicated cryptocurrency question in 2 weeks. And we can't figure out the several states in which people are making false electors and holding phony meetings and planning their own competition. December the 14th, I think, is the date for when the when the electors, the real electors, would be chosen. And they sort of did it out there. They do it all out there. It's worse than three-card Monte. It's so obvious. But the short answer is, if you prosecute the crime, you actually do deter people, because a lot of people don't want to spend 5 to 20 years in custody.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it is a bit of legal jargon, but the bottom line is the electors are supposed to only carry out what the state votes on. And if they fail to do that or other people impersonate them, that's a type of fraud. It's just like someone could show up in front of your house waving a fraudulent deed. That's a crime. If they go into your house, that's a second crime. But the paperwork fraud is already pretty established. Timothy's question was about the media. I think the short answer is, like other groups, the media can definitely get involved in herd group mentality, group think, and certain things might get over-repeated. I think it's certainly the case that there was a period of time where what we might call traditional analysis, where you say politically, oh, this is, you go to the right in the primary and you talk to the center and this is the base. When you're dealing with what Trump did, both ideologically, politically, and then against democracy, no, I think those sort of heuristics or those cliches don't hold. I do think we also need to be precise, because whether people like hearing it or not, I go in places sometimes and people say, oh, they're all fascists. No, they're not. Or, yes, Mitch McConnell always found ways to support all of Trump's political domestic objectives. So that was, I think you're right there, and that's not just quote the base, it goes to the elites. It's also true that in December, Mitch McConnell helped primarily a Democratic coalition with Schumer break a filibuster to pass those reforms to the Electoral Count Act to try to coup-proof parts of it. If that gets less attention, or people say, no, McConnell's a fascist too, I don't think that's accurate. And I think it's not only not accurate, it's also pretty interesting that Mitch McConnell only made common cause with Schumer to break a handful of filibusters, and that was one. So I do think we have to be precise, but I think Timothy raises a fair point. I see we have a lot of folks. I want to keep it moving to the question, and make sure you speak in the mic if you can.
Hi, my name's Rita. When you walked in, I said, he looks like Robert Redford to my friend, just so you know. So there's a consensus.
Thank you.
I always thought that. So I live in the District of Columbia, like taxation without representation, right? Woo, woo, right, yay. Cheers to no vote, yay. So January 2nd, January 3rd, January 4th, January 5th, my girlfriends and I were texting each other and saying, take out your Biden Harris signs, take down your Black Lives Matter signs, lock the doors, don't send your kids to camp or whatever, school or whatever you could. It was during COVID, my kids were in school, they could go. I kept them home. Those traitors were staying at the Days Inn 3 blocks from my house on Connecticut Avenue, right? They were outside smoking cigarettes with their camo on and drinking beers, and just, we literally kept our kids away from the windows because we were scared of them. So how is it that everybody on Nextdoor knew that they were violent and we were scared of them, but the Capitol Police didn't know, and Nancy Pelosi didn't know? Representative Raskin had just lost his son the week before, and then he brought his daughter and a son-in-law. I almost called him and was like, Jamie, what are you doing? But he had just lost his son, so I didn't want to bother him. But they went in, and it's like nobody knew, but everybody on the ground knew. Mm-hmm. We knew it was going to be dangerous. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Where's the disconnect there?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. It's driving me crazy.
Hi, my name is Malcolm. I'm going to the Supreme Court place. It seems like we've mentioned that a few times tonight, and all roads, or at least a lot of roads, lead to the Supreme Court. And on January 6th, almost to the extreme for some decision about what may have happened that night. So we've got Supreme Court problems. This is probably more than just a microphone question here, but obviously we've got to fix that. Two solutions that are always talked about is term limits for the justices and a larger court. I'd love your opinion about is either valid, or if not, what would be?
Great. And let's do one more, because I see the line.
First of all, Ari, I'm really glad you got to finally meet me in person. Congratulations.
Me too.
And I really came to meet John. We're neighbors, Ashburn, Virginia, Loudon. We've been friends on Facebook for years. Finally got to meet. So,
Good to see you. Or I can
Absolutely.
really not see you, actually.
So I'm a retired firefighter, been a union member for 33 years. I grew up in Beckley, West Virginia. I'm what you would probably affectionately call a liberal redneck. So it's my opinion, and we're all here by default, we can make the assumption we're intellectual, whether formally or informally, because we're seeking the knowledge. My question for both of you would be, how do you take somebody that is a part of an organization, generally speaking, that is anti-intellectual? Donald Trump made them want to be like that because he told them it was okay. He told them that we make fun of them because they're stupid or they're ignorant or they're backwoods. I don't feel that way. I speak fluent redneck and fluent vulgarity. I can communicate effectively. But how do you get people to want? These are complicated issues. I have to Google shit all the time after I watch your show. How do you get people to want to understand it? Because that's what has to happen for this to mean something or to change.
Love the question in your story. How do you say Robert Redford in Bulgarian?
Vulgarity? I said,
No, how do you say Robert Redford in Bulgarian?
Oh, I don't know. I can't.
Did you say you speak Bulgarian or vulgarity?
Vulgarity.
Oh, don't answer that.
Yeah. That's why I was looking at you like
I thought you were a
that.
Bulgarian firefighter. You know, it's a big room.
No, I said I
And thank you to everyone who helped us with that. So why don't you answer any of those questions?
Okay, well, you hit a chord with me. I was a kid in the South Bronx, and I thought it was an Irish Catholic dilemma to find another Irishman that was intelligent. And I quickly found that there was plenty. I just was in that isolated group. But I got very interested in what Hofstadter and Arthur Schlesinger said about the anti-intellectualism that they suffered in the 20s and the 40s. And so it has been a problem in America from the very beginning to now. And the only answer to that is to fight it. And when I say fight it, I mean you have to sort of follow Lincoln's notion that if somebody makes an accusation, you have to deal with it some way. And dealing with it as fully and as completely as you can, even if that means making admissions about classified documents. You have to deal with it. My partner in a law firm in New York was 30 years older than me. He said in every case and in life, there is in the middle of the room this huge dead animal, and everybody walks around it, nobody deals with it. We have to deal with anti-intellectuals in this country, and we have to deal with them squarely by saying, stop talking that blank.
Yeah. And on the reforming the Supreme Court, it can happen. I think term limits, when you look at how many other things have changed in American life, could make sense. If you change the size, you have to have some thoughtful plan about what you're doing and why you're not going to just trigger the endless recriminations of going back and forth on that. But I do think one model would be there are states that have dealt with gerrymandering by having independent, nonpartisan approaches, and sometimes there are ways that works. Whereas when both parties go back and forth out gerrymandering each other, everyone loses long term. The next door question about the intelligence going up to the 6th, I think, to me, it cuts both ways. One, the report and what we've learned shows there were structural problems as well as politicized pressure on what the response was going to be, so that's part of the answer. The other, which may be a less satisfying answer to the questioner who feels they knew this was coming, was that when you look at after-action events, there can be a post-event bias. So yes, there were warnings going into 9/11, but it was also a highly unprecedented and different attack. So I think reasonable minds can debate or differ on whether this was, oh my God, definitely going to happen, how come you didn't see it? Or this insurrection to even members of Congress who were not in on it seemed somewhat unfathomable. And had those other folks not been as successful, they would have just been people in camo drinking beers, which is not to dismiss your point, but to say I think it does cut a little bit both ways. I think, let's keep going. How about right here?
I think I just want to mention that if Mitch McConnell participates in fascism, then he is thereby fascist, and he does participate. So I think you were being too careful. But my question is, I was in South Carolina. I lived in South Carolina during the Trump era, and I survived somehow. And thank God I'm not there anymore. But now that the Republicans are in charge of Congress again, you know, I knew every cabinet member, I knew everybody, and everything they did the entire time because it felt so dangerous what was happening. And I felt urgently that I needed to know. But I don't want to know anymore. I don't want to listen to Jim Jordan. I don't think I'm alone in that. Do I have to listen to Jim Jordan? And if I do have to listen to Jim Jordan, how do I convince other people that don't care or see the danger as much as I do, that they also have to listen to Jim effing Jordan?
Okay.
Hi, my name's Harry, and I wanted to follow up on it with something that each of you mentioned in your individual remarks earlier. And I want to drill down more specifically about a hypothetical scenario which could have happened if Mike Pence had decided to cave to Trump's demands, throw out, and either do one of the following things: throw out some of the election results, or send it back to the states, or try to have a scenario where there's a contingent election in the House. Or, fourth possibility, the violence was so successful that it actually literally killed at least one member of Congress. Any of those four things happen, and there's a chaotic situation where the Republicans claim that Trump is the president. The Democrats would say, hold on, that's not constitutional. Each of those four things I just named, there's constitutional legal flaws in all of them. Suppose the Democrats, it's January 7th, the Democrats try to file an emergency lawsuit in the Supreme Court. What do you think would happen then, especially considering the fact that 4 of the Supreme Court justices would probably lay their bodies down on the railroad tracks before they would go along with a fascist coup, and that they would only need to get one more member to sign on to an opinion that says Joe Biden is the legally elected president?
Mm-hmm. Great. And you, sir?
Hi, my name's Christian, and I'm a big fan, longtime viewer, first-time caller. And I really appreciate what you do. I appreciate what you're doing. But with all due respect to the name of your book and the committee that it was named after, don't you feel like this phrase January 6th is a bit of a wasted messaging opportunity? Wouldn't the Trump riot or the Republican coup or the right-wing you fill in the blank be a more effective phrase, especially now that we know that January 6th was just one part of what you're saying was an 8-part plan? It might be a time to start calling it something else.
Well, I think it's a great question. The top of the book is the government's name, and all 3 editions, as a New Yorker edition, New York Times edition. The bottom is what I told Harper I wanted to discuss, which was the coup conspiracy. So I'm right there with you.
Very good, very good.
I'm right there with you. And appreciate the kind remarks. We had a Beat viewer who disagreed with me on McConnell, which we welcome. We had a Beat viewer with an idea about the how to describe it. And words, I mean, lawyers will tell you words matter, right? Because that is the entree, the window that you open in people's minds to then discuss something. I will take the constitutional crisis question, and you could respond to everything else. This is, by show of hands, how many lawyers are here? Yeah, fewer. Because they're like, I deal with Johns and Aries all day. I'm not coming to this at night. I don't care if it is in a synagogue. You get into the very legalistic part of Supreme Court practice here, which I think we referenced earlier, where I said if they did the fake state delegation vote and then said, oh, this means Trump is actually still president, then you would need to petition the Supreme Court to take the case in whatever that narrow window of time is. And the question is, would they take it or not? If they don't take it, either Trump stays president or you have a constitutional crisis about it. If they take it, if, for example, Chief Justice Roberts finds, 5, they could then have 4 to take it, 5 to vote on it, and issue a ruling that says, notwithstanding the House's attempt to use fraud to lie and hold this sham vote, the election stands and Biden is still the president-elect. As soon as the Supreme Court says that, even if you have violence in the streets and the House in revolt, as with all questions of crisis in country, the question becomes, what does the military do, right? It's sort of sad we have to talk about this, but the evidence we have is that the military goes with the Supreme Court, not with the bananas House. And so in that instance, I think as you get to the 19th and the 20th, the military in this country is backing that. If, however, the court doesn't intervene, or it's a situation where it's the reverse, Biden is holding, but the Trump folks are trying to get back up before the court unlawfully, same question, are there 4 to hear it? We do have some evidence on that I think is encouraging, which is there were never 4 votes before the 6th to hear any of the more than 30 bullshit cases filed by the Trump team. And I say bullshit because that's what they were. Now, a lot of people thought Bush v. Gore was a very unusual outcome. But I don't call that case bullshit because legally it was argued up to the top. It had legitimate ingredients even if you strongly disagree with it. And so I think that is, to the hypothetical question that was posed, the issue. And the problem is you have a training ground here where people like Bannon and Navarro, they see this as something that they would like to improve upon and maybe shrink it down. Maybe 14 days was too long. They try to take over and use those days and do it the other way with what John warned about. So that's my answer to some of that. All the other questions are yours.
Refresh my recollection, because I was running through my mind all the things I wanted to say about that issue.
Do we really have to listen to what some might call, Chairman Jordan, or what some consider, quote, the other side? The Pence question I sort of answered, so, yeah.
Yeah, well, the thing with No Jacket Jordan is, he represents the new leadership that we permitted to happen by doing nothing to force anyone to account for what happened 2 years ago. And that's just what we learned from history. You let these people do the things they do. Now, you see Schiff, the reprisal against him for working hard on an impeachment prosecution and for defending our intelligence network and calling strikes and foul balls in a position with his experience in intelligence, that is not valued in this Congress. He's going to run for the Senate, I guess. And what's happening in the House, meanwhile, is we have the children loose. And they're not going to... Now, you could say, well, we can wait 2 years, but we have no idea what's going to happen, and we can't tolerate this. But we planted the seeds for this catastrophe by not, in my opinion, doing something even before the midterms. It's interesting, and the nation does not believe we Democrats, I'm a genetic Democrat, we Democrats should be trusted to be in charge. And they don't trust the Republicans either. So we have a paralysis. We didn't make the sale. We didn't carry the burden of persuasion. We didn't explain to people that we're not just empathetic, we're warriors for democracy, and we have to be, and you have to come with us. And so the people have to learn to speak, and it may be tiring, it may go on, but if we don't, we will be victims, as has happened in every other nation, when something like this banana republic raises its head, and a guy who shouldn't be in charge of the judiciary or somebody shouldn't be on the oversight committee occurs. And that's the hell that we're experiencing, political hell.
I think we'll go to our final round of questions, which, with apologies, we did not get to everyone. And I'll say a few items in closing, including one more thing I want to share. And then for those who want, of course, the night will go on for those who want to come say hello, but that's a different process. I want to be judicious with the time for those who may have places to go. Sir.
Hello, I'm Oliver. Now, my question is going to reveal my age. I don't watch TV. I watch your show on YouTube when you post on YouTube. And so I guess from your perspective, what is the current status quo of television?
Interesting. Okay. Well, we love YouTube on the beat.
Great program, gentlemen. My name is Mike Italiano. My question is about the nascent effort to prohibit Trump by the 14th Amendment to be on the ballot in the states. Colorado has an initiative. There's an unknown Republican candidate for president who filed a case in federal court in Florida. I think the House bill is probably dead politically. There's a lot of dark money that would oppose this. But I think that the issue is really important. I was wondering whether you think this is something that the program should cover as a possible way to drive policy.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tracy. I am originally from Detroit, Michigan, and my son and I are here today. Ari, congratulations. You, my 30-something-year-old son, and I watch you at the same time.
We like that, Bridge. And you're about 41?
I'm a thorough AARP member. Yeah. My question is, in my state of Michigan, the Republican Party paid for several buses of folks to come to the January 6th insurrection. Mm-hmm. And I grew up with the Black Panthers and the Civil Rights Movement, and the government came down full force with both boots on them. Mm-hmm. This doesn't happen without money. And I don't really hear who are the moneyed interests that all of this shenanigans benefit, because it doesn't help me, it doesn't help my son, and it doesn't help my lovely grandbaby. Mm-hmm. So who is it that benefits from this shenanigans?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name's Patty. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia. This is a really light question. This is not going to require a whole lot of thought. When you were kids, I'm a teacher, so when you guys were kids, I always like to ask people, what were you like? Or maybe just one memory from your childhood, both of you.
Okay, maybe we'll do that one near the end, John. I got that down. And again here, please.
Hi, Patty Morrissey, old friend of John Flannery.
Hi, Patty.
I used to ask him questions on a regular basis. Given the strength of the big lie in the Trump-supporting part of the citizenry and the demonstrated willingness of many of those citizens to use violence to do Trump's bidding, to what extent do you think that the mass psychosis politics are driving what seems to be a reluctance or minimally a frustrating slowness on the part of the Biden DOJ to move against the lead coup plotter and bring Donald Trump to justice in a timely manner?
Okay.
John, my question is this, and I've been following this for the longest kind of time.
And come into the mic if you would for me.
I've been following this for the longest kind of time. In the beginning, with Donald Trump's lies, it took Donald Trump almost 22,000 lives before any network would call him a liar, okay? That was crazy. I would like to know now, since I've seen two military people get arrested or being charged, and being in the military myself, these guys are going to face treason for just being there, okay? How long is it going to take before these media outlets start calling Donald Trump a traitor? Because that's what he is. He has violated the Constitution of the United States, which every senator, congressman, president, vice president has taken an oath to the Constitution, not to a person. That's treason. And I would like to hear it more said on television, and that might bring a lot of people around. When they start calling them liars, we all stood up. But now he's gone beyond that.
Thank you. And I think we'll do last question to the group, and then I'll remind you of these. Go ahead.
I
Yes.
got them written this
Okay,
time.
good.
I'm ready for you.
Hi, my name is Simone. I am bringing a question from my mom in California who wishes that you were her son.
It's funny.
Or husband or son-in-law, it doesn't matter. She just, yeah, she loves
I
you.
think son and husband is very different.
No,
different
I'm saying
roles.
she'll take anything at this point. Okay, real quick. She says, "Hi, Ari, probably a dumb question. What would you see as the ideal for our country in the post-Trump era, and what will it take to heal the divisiveness?"
The ideal,
The ideal, she just said the ideal for our country.
like what our country could be?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or, you know, forward steps. I don't know.
Thank you. And hello to, it's Simone is the mom? You
No,
don't-
I'm
You're
Simone. My
What's-
mom is Jean.
Jean.
Yeah.
Tell Jean we said hello.
She'll cry if I tell her that. No, I'm kidding.
Tell her, and you know I'm a journalist, so it's all facts. Tell her that had she come tonight, we would have gone out to dinner and then gotten married. But she's not here. So, you know, you never know. All right, we're going to give you some answers. I have a couple thoughts, and then at the end I want to share something, and then for those who are leaving, we'll say goodbye, and for those who are staying, we'll do the meet and greet. So a little more fun tonight. John,
Okay.
do you want me to remind you anything, or you're going to go?
I got.
Go ahead.
I think I can sum up a couple. Patty, John, and the question about the Section 14 of the Constitution, Article 14, Section 3. I think it is absolutely right. We've been selling this bogus thing about no man is above the law when plainly people are. There's a whole political and business class that is above everybody else. And we've gone into that stage in the absence of laws that are reliable, that have an accounting, into this period of violence. And we're seeing it more and more. And we've had stories in the last week or so. We, the people, are going to make the difference. And as a guy who went through Watergate, the Vietnam War, the lies to get us into Iraq, as I see it, and so on, it's always been the people that have straightened these things out. Not immediately and not for all time. But as a young man, when I read Jefferson saying that he always believed the people got it right, I think he's right because their vested interest is in the community and what matters to them. We do kids last?
Last, yeah.
Well, as a kid...
Wait, do you have anything else? What about...
TV status quo?
I'll do TV. You do justice for Donald Trump and treason.
Well, that's simple.
Then I'll do TV.
And he'll do TV. That's fair. True. He is a treasonous SOB that has no business. Getting a nomination, much less anything else. And that Article 14, Section 3 provides if you've taken an oath to preserve and protect the United States, that you can be barred from holding public office. But we don't commit ourselves to the remedy for the outrage. And so what we do is we compel others to do these kinds of things as well, because there's no punishment for doing it. So that the problem, it always goes back to law, and if we as individuals don't open our mouth and talk, then to borrow from the New Testament, Jesus said, if you are tepid, I will spit you forth from my mouth. I'm not religious, but I think it's absolutely correct that we are an enlivening aspect of our community, our family, and everything when we say the things that can matter and give somebody else freedom to agree or disagree and to move the ball along. That's not happening in America, not with the lies that we're suffering. So that's my take on that.
Great. The question about what would an ideal America be, I mean, that's a tough question. Maybe one of those AI bots could give us like, free answers. But one of the great divides that we know from history, whether you do it in school or you read history books or, you know, people don't tell you this, law school is mostly just history. It's just the history of court cases. And you keep reading them. I don't know how you felt, but by second year I was like, wait a minute. Are we just going to read court cases the whole time? Like I thought it would go somewhere, and it didn't. And you do learn something by by first being that versed in something. But I think a line that we know throughout American history, which is different from some other societies, some countries that are younger or that have more despotic and feudal systems, is very early on there was a promise and an appeal to a notion of progress. It wasn't real, and that left this divide that many people who are far more learned than I am about American history, I'm not a historian, but many learned people have described in various ways as a choice. Is it a lie because it wasn't a democracy and people didn't have equal rights and women weren't a part of it? Or was it a promise that you make them fulfill? And I think when I look at that history, that's what I see, and that lives today. So, you know, one of the most interesting things that Dr. King did that, you know, someone asked about what we're like as kids, and we'll get to that, but I remember being young and being very interested in Dr. King, and my parents had one of the sets of speeches that they used to sell on vinyl, and I used to put it on the vinyl and listen. And I remember thinking about, he knew better than most and lived through and ultimately gave his life in sacrifice to this terrible injustice of American racism. But what he was summoning us to do was to treat it as a promise that we might yet fulfill, rather than only a lie. And so, rather than give an answer, because I didn't even write my own book, you know, this is their book, I'll give you that answer, which other people wiser than I have said throughout history, that to Simone's mother's question, Jean, I don't have a good memory, so, you know. To Jean's question, but I think of her as Simone's mother. And or my future wife. To Jean's question, I think the better ideal America in the future might be us trying to actually continue to do that. That work's not done. I'll do YouTube and then we'll do kids.
Okay.
And then we'll finish up. The YouTube question's really great. The young man said, well, I don't watch you on TV. Of course, this is a jump ball in how we use language. You do, right? It's just TV on a different platform. Is Kindle mean you don't read this book? No, you get it on Kindle, it'll be lighter than this thing. Although me, I like a good old-fashioned book. I still get the Times in the print paper personally. But what YouTube has done, it is one of the most used and most searched platforms in the world. It is more accessible to more people, including people with less money, marginalized people, than many other platforms. You still need access to an internet connection, whether you go to a library or a friend's house or you live in the developed world, and you might have that access, but it's cheaper than linear cable and it's cheaper than a lot of other things. I think YouTube is completely revolutionized information. We talk so much about the internet as a dark place for division, and people use it that way. But the history of knowledge, information in society is always bound up with the transmission of human ideas and culture. So people say, oh, the printing press from roughly the 1600s. Well, behind us, there are scrolls that long predate the printing press, right? Talk about Jews often identify as a people of the book, and being in that knowledge-based emphasis, at least at a religious level, but it can seep out into other ways throughout that identity. You've quoted your scripture because as a good, how do you define yourself?
A former Bronx Irish Catholic.
As a good Irish Catholic, you know that. And so, and then you go to the dark side of it is, in Nazi Germany, some of the very top people next to the military appointees were the propaganda czars. And Putin is obsessed with image and propaganda. And these people we talked about tonight are doing that. So that's a big, big answer to what do I think about YouTube. I think it's vital that we provide it there. And the positive for people who work and care about journalism is, while the business model is under strain, and it's very important that if you're in a position to subscribe to a local newspaper or support local reporters or subscribe to those newsletters, I think that's vital. The business model is under strain, but there's never been, thus far, a more broad impact of what we're doing than right now. We have things we've done when we had Mr. Peter Navarro, who's now awaiting trial. When we had him on the show, it was noticed in the government and elite. It was noticed on television, but I can tell you the interview then went viral. More people saw it after it aired than live. So if you care about, sometimes people come up to me and they're a little concerned, are the facts getting out there? YouTube has been a huge force multiplier for that, for us, and for other people for cat videos. So, there's more than one thing on there. But I'm bullish about that. When I was a kid, my dad's nickname for me when I was like 8 was he called me a box of rocks because he said I talked so much. And I remember it used to upset me, like it was like pejorative, but, good-natured. And I think as I was a very talkative kid, I was very extroverted. I was always interested in learning about other people. My parents raised me to just engage everything. I didn't realize that it was somewhat unusual. And in that sense, as a kid, I didn't know how lucky I was that we, at the dinner table, would talk about everything from their work to school to things that were happening around the world. I remember I was only going to other kids' houses when, it's funny because I work in TV, but like the TV was on through all of dinner. That was different to me. That was never in my house. Or they only talked about sort of almost babyish stuff with the kids, and then the kids and the adults separated. So I was very fortunate. I had really wonderful parents who are still with me, married. They've been married 51 years, and they're amazing. And I don't know how they'll respond to the wedding I'm going to have, but that's how I was as a kid. And then that was because of them. It was the product of the environment, right? And they used to have friends over, and then John will tell us what kind of kid he was. They would have friends over sometimes when I was, not like 9 years old, and I would come down to go talk because I was interested in talking to people. And I remember my parents, Danny and Barb, I would say to some friend of theirs in the kitchen, if they were in the other room, I'd say, so how did you first meet Danny and Barb? And they later said, the adults would say to my parents, so what are you teaching him small talk? And they would say, no, that's like, he's just like that. And I think both things are true. Maybe I was just like that because I do love talking to people, but I also think they made me a little bit like that. So that's the kind of kid I was. What kind of kid were you?
We're similar in a lot of ways. My parents let me talk no matter who was around, and when I won in grammar school some local oratorical contest, second in the Bronx, questionable, my dad said to me, I didn't know that you could do that you could compete in that. And I said, well, I think it's because when adults are over, nobody tells me to shut up, so I figure I have the license to talk. And I was the kind of kid that I didn't know why after the first week we weren't going to school on Saturday. I so enjoyed the first week. And I gave signals, I guess, of my interests. And so my dad got me a little printing press, and when I printed out little headlines and things. And I studied speakers from the Midwest because I wanted to speak in such a way, And so I left the phone. I'd pick up the phone at our home in the Bronx, and I'd say, hello, this is the Flannery residence. How can I help you? And my mom would get on, and the woman would say, what's it with John? What's he putting on his airs? What's this? What's this residence business? Telescopes, tape recorders. There was a huge tape recorder, and friends of mine, we'd do Edgar Allan Poe. There's a knocking at my door, etc. All those things. The most important moment in my education as a young man was I was at this high school, Jesuit high school, and it was in the afternoon, and I was going to my Latin class, and I was on the university, and I saw all these people going into the gymnasium, and I thought, well, I have time, and not that might have stopped me anyhow, so it's like a B movie. I'm going past all these university students, all these tall kids, and I was a real ugly duckling. In grammar school, I was fat. I was ugly for part of high school. And some still think I'm ugly in my soul, I suppose, but because of my politics. So I'm going to the class, and I see this crowd, and I go with them, and I go in, and there's a huge Klieg light on the left going across this room, first generation college, Irish, Catholic, Italians, and the person who's speaking is a young senator, and he's challenging everybody to make a difference, and it was Jack Kennedy. So I went back to the class, and I didn't get in any trouble, and I was in a reverie. And so the two things that have matched up my life with what I do is I was crazy about science, but I was obsessive about politics. And so I worked out a pattern that got me where I am. And I think sometimes if you look back on your life, what seems like a random walk is not at all. All those little choices you make fit you. And if you resist the moment that you have to go forward, then you lose part of the joy that you could have in life. Thank you. We gave him a show, fella.
It was a great question. Love that, John, and we appreciate you so much. I'm going to close by sharing something. The housekeeping items are, again, for those who are leaving, our special thanks to this wonderful building that's hosted so many interesting and important conversations, and Sixth and I, and Politics and Prose, and HarperCollins that published this edition. If you want to keep up with us, some of you know the beat, and you get it that way. I do want to give you 2 links. So you have the question about YouTube. Everyone can get our YouTube playlist, which is free, or you can give it to anyone in your life, including younger people who don't tend to buy cable these days. I don't know if you heard. MSNBC.com/Ari. You don't even have to write it down. You'll remember that. MSNBC.com/Ari. That link goes to our YouTube playlist, which is updated daily. And for people who don't have cable or anyone you want to share in your life, there's that. I write on a regular basis for people who are looking for extra stuff beyond the show. You can subscribe to my newsletter for free at arimelber.com. Also, I think an address you can remember. It's my name. .com. So those are housekeeping items. And on the meet and greet, the way we want to do this is pretty cash. John and I are going to walk off for a sec. We are coming back. We're not leaving for good. We're going to walk off and take our mics off. We're going to come up here. We're going to have people come up in groups. We'll both be up here. So if you really are here to talk to John, he's hanging out. Me, hanging out. Talk to both of us. We wanted to do that in that way. Who benefits? Always a good question. So what we're going to do is leave time for that, and y'all, those who want to stay can come up. Those, I know some of you are leaving. With that, I want to share one more thing, okay?
Okay, yeah, I'm good. I'm good with that.
I didn't read a bunch from the lectern, but I decided I want to read to you the final page and a half of what I wrote. Again, because some of the people are going to buy that book, take it home, and it's intimidating. You might not read it, right? So this is how the book closes for those who want to hear my own voice, the foreword. January 6th is more than a day. It's more than a shorthand for an event and its related issues, like some historical dates in the public mindset. January 6th turned out to be more than one violent attack. It marks the criminal culmination of an organized conspiracy led out of the White House. The evidence of criminal intent runs across weeks and sometimes months. Several plotters were warned their plans were unlawful or criminal, and they pressed on. Most of the plotters never took the physical step of storming the Capitol. Some even opposed that particular tactic while pushing other illegal plots pursuing the same result. The people at the Capitol that day, many now convicts, formed the criminal muscle backing one plot among several. They didn't operate in isolation, and to Trump they were just pawns. The more senior planners, aides, and lawyers, the ones who knew the certification date and how the Electoral Count Act might be exploited and the rules for an endgame where a delayed certification might keep Trump in office, none of them have been indicted. That's why the date matters. If it were a one-day riot, that might be the right outcome. But if it is a coup conspiracy, and the powerful people, the White House aides guarded by agents with guns paid by your tax dollars, wielding the powers of prosecution force and even potentially the military, if they get away with the attempted coup, then what? The consequences go beyond justice. They cut to the public safety and the future of our democracy. There's a political writer, Doug Porter, who put it so simply. He's actually, side note, one of the only people I quote outside of government in this piece. And he's just an independent writer I read in California. Quote, if Trump's coup attempt goes unpunished, it will become a training exercise. That's where we are now. the full objective reality of what happened and what we do about it can ultimately decide whether we, the United States, acts to make this a terrible aberration of this era or that public training for the next coup. And democracy may turn on us facing those facts in this report, in independent accounts of these plots, and whether we, the United States, ultimately acts on them. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to Ari Melber and John P. Flannery. That was awesome. If you are staying for the meet and greet, please stay seated. Autograph books are for sale in the main lobby. And if you'd like to exit, the exits are to my left and to my right on this level. So y'all on the balcony are going to come on down. And you don't need to go any further down. All the exits are on this level. We'll call you up for the meet and greet soon, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.